The blood on Clara Whitmore's apron had turned from bright crimson to rust brown, and she knew that meant she had been working without rest for nearly 18 hours straight. The makeshift hospital in the old Prescott freight warehouse smelled of carbolic acid, sweat, and something darker that she tried not to think about as she moved between the rows of wounded men sprawled on whatever bedding the townspeople had been able to spare. The range war between the cattle barons and the homesteaders had turned vicious 3 weeks ago, and the casualties kept arriving in wagons, draped over horses, or limping in on their own with holes torn through flesh that had no business being torn. She pressed a cool cloth against the forehead of a young homesteader whose name she thought might be William, though she had stopped trying to remember all their names after the first dozen. His fever had broken an hour ago, and she whispered a prayer of gratitude as she checked the bandage wrapped around his shoulder. The bullet had gone clean through, which was the only mercy in any of this. She had pulled 7 bullets out of various bodies in the past 3 days, and her hands still shook when she thought about the grinding feeling of metal against bone. "Miss Whitmore, we need more clean water," called out Rebecca Martin, one of the other women who had volunteered to help tend the wounded. Rebecca was a banker's wife with soft hands that had blistered raw from scrubbing blood out of linens, but she never complained. None of them did. Complaining seemed foolish when men were dying. Clara straightened up, feeling her spine crack in 3 places, and nodded. "I will go to the pump. Keep an eye on the man in the corner. His breathing has been getting shallow." She stepped out into the brutal Arizona sun of late July 1892, squinting against the brightness after so many hours in the dim warehouse. Prescott sprawled around her, a town that had grown fat on mining money and cattle wealth, now tearing itself apart over water rights and grazing land. She had lived here for 2 years, ever since her father had died and left her with nothing but his medical books and a determination to use them. Women were not supposed to be doctors, but women were allowed to be nurses, and in the chaos of the range war, nobody questioned her skills too closely when men were bleeding. The water pump stood in the yard behind the warehouse, and Clara worked the handle with arms that burned with exhaustion. She had just filled the first bucket when she heard the sound of hooves and wagon wheels crunching across the dry ground. She turned, shading her eyes, and saw a wagon pulled by 2 sturdy horses coming around the side of the building. The driver was a man she did not recognize, which was unusual in a town like Prescott, where she knew most faces by sight. He swung down from the wagon seat with the easy grace of someone who had spent his entire life on horseback. He was tall, probably close to 30 years old, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face weathered by sun and wind. He wore the typical garb of a working cowboy, nothing fancy, and his hat was dusty from travel. What caught her attention was not his appearance, but the way he moved toward the back of the wagon with purpose, already untying the canvas that covered the wagon bed. "This the hospital?" he called out, his voice rough but not unkind. "If you can call it that," Clara replied, setting down her bucket and walking closer. "Are you wounded?" "No, ma'am. Name is James Cordell. I brought supplies. Heard in town that you folks were running low on just about everything." Clara felt something tighten in her chest, and she realized it was the sting of unexpected tears. She had sent word to every business in Prescott 3 days ago, begging for donations of bandages, medicine, food, anything that might help, and she had received exactly 2 responses, both promising to think about it. The war had divided the town sharply, and most people did not want to be seen helping the wounded of the opposing side, even though Clara treated everyone who came through her doors regardless of which side they fought for. "That is very generous of you, Mr. Cordell," she managed, moving to peer into the wagon bed. Her breath caught. There were crates of canned goods, sacks of flour and beans, rolls of clean cotton fabric, bottles of laudanum and carbolic acid, even a box of real soap. "This must have cost a fortune." "I had money saved," he said simply, pulling one of the crates toward the edge of the wagon. Did not see much point in keeping it when folks were suffering. Where do you want this? Clara directed him to carry the supplies into the warehouse, and she followed with her bucket of water, watching him as he moved. There was something solid about James Cordell, something that felt like bedrock in a world that had turned to quicksand. He did not flinch when he stepped into the warehouse and saw the rows of wounded men, did not turn away from the smell or the sounds of pain. He simply set down his crate where she indicated and went back for another load. By the time they had unloaded everything, Rebecca had appeared at Clara's elbow with wide eyes. "Who is that?" she whispered. "James Cordell. He brought supplies. He is not from around here." "No," Clara agreed. She approached James as he set down the last sack of flour. "Mr. Cordell, I cannot thank you enough. This will keep us going for at least another week, maybe 2 if we are careful." He turned to her, and she noticed his eyes were a clear gray, like rain clouds over the mountains. "Is it just you and her taking care of all these men?" "There are 3 other women who come when they can, but yes, mostly it is the 2 of us. Everyone else is either too frightened or too partisan." James looked around the warehouse again, his jaw tightening. Clara counted 17 men in the beds, some sleeping, some staring at the ceiling, one crying softly in the corner. "You need more help than that." "Yes, well, wishes and needs rarely align, Mr. Cordell. We do what we can." He was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "I can stay." "Help out. I am not a doctor, but I am strong and I can follow orders." Clara stared at him. "You want to stay here, in this warehouse, tending wounded men from a war that is not yours." "War is never really anybody's, is it?" James said. "It just happens to them, and these men need help." "Seems pretty simple to me." Rebecca made a small sound that might have been approval or surprise. Clara felt something shift in her chest, something that had been clenched tight for weeks beginning to loosen just slightly. "We have no money to pay you," did not ask for any. "It will be hard work, unpleasant work. Most work worth doing is." Clara found herself smiling for the first time in days. "Then I accept your offer, Mr. Cordell. Thank you, truly." He nodded and hung his hat on a nail by the door. "Tell me what needs doing." What needed doing, as it turned out, was everything. Clara set James to work helping move patients so she could change bandages, and she quickly discovered that he had understated his usefulness. He was gentle with the wounded men despite his size and strength, speaking to them in a low, calm voice as he helped them sit up or lie back down. He did not seem bothered by blood or by the intimate work of emptying bedpans and washing bodies. When one of the homesteaders started thrashing with fever dreams, James held him steady without hurting him, murmuring something about how the worst was over. "Just hold on a little longer." "You have done this before," Clara said as they worked together to clean and rebandage a particularly nasty leg wound on a cattle hand named Martinez. "My brother was hurt bad in a stampede when I was younger," James said, his hands steady as he held Martinez's leg still. "Spent 3 weeks taking care of him. He lived, but it was close. I learned a lot in those 3 weeks. Where is your brother now, Montana? He has a ranch up there, married, 3 kids, doing well. And you," James glanced at her, and there was something unreadable in his expression. "I have been moving around, working different ranches, seeing the country, never found a place that felt like it wanted me to stay." Clara focused on tying off the bandage, unsure what to say to that. She knew something about not having a place to stay. Her mother had died when she was young, and her father had dragged her across 3 territories chasing opportunities that never quite materialized. Prescott was the closest thing she had ever had to a home, and even that felt temporary, like she was just marking time until the next inevitable displacement. The afternoon bled into evening, and James did not leave. When Rebecca went home to her husband, James stayed, helping Clara prepare a thin soup from some of the supplies he had brought. They moved through the warehouse together, spooning broth into mouths that could manage it, dripping water onto the lips of those who could not. One man, a young homesteader with a chest wound that Clara knew would probably kill him in the next day or 2, gripped her hand and thanked her with tears running down his face. She held his hand until he fell asleep, and when she finally pulled away, she found James watching her with something that looked like respect. "You care about them," he said quietly. "Of course I do. Not everyone would. Lot of folks see these men as just one side or the other. Cattle or homestead, rich or poor, you see them as people?" Clara felt her throat tighten. "They are people. That is all that matters." Night fell, and the warehouse grew dark except for the lanterns they kept burning low to save oil. Most of the wounded men slept, aided by exhaustion or laudanum or both. Clara finally allowed herself to sink down onto a wooden chair, her entire body aching. James sat on the floor nearby, his back against the wall, and for a few minutes they simply existed in the quiet together. "Why did you really come here?" Clara asked. "To Prescott, I mean. You said you heard about the supplies we needed, but how did you hear?" James was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "I was working a ranch about 50 miles south of here. When the range war started heating up, the owner decided to get involved, wanted to send all his men up here to fight for the cattle barons. I told him I did not sign on to shoot homesteaders, that those folks were just trying to make a living same as anybody. He fired me. I was riding north, figured I would head up to Colorado maybe, and I stopped in Prescott for supplies. Heard some men in the general store talking about how the hospital was running out of everything, how the women running it were begging for help and nobody would give it. Made me angry. So I spent my wages on supplies and brought them here." Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest. "You gave up your wages, all of them. Like I said, I had no particular use for them. Money does not mean much if you are not using it for something worthwhile." "That is a rare philosophy, Mr. Cordell. Call me James. And it is not rare, it is just practical. My mama raised me to help folks when I could. Seems like this is one of those times." Clara smiled. "Then you must call me Clara." He looked at her, and even in the dim lantern light she could see the warmth in his eyes. "Clara, that is a good name, strong. My mother's name. I have tried to live up to it." "I think you have." They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, and then James said, "You should sleep." "I can watch over things for a few hours." Clara wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a physical weight. "You need sleep too." "I will take it after you. Go on. There is a cot in the corner that looks cleaner than the others." She was too tired to protest further. She made her way to the cot and lay down without even removing her boots. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was James standing up to check on the wounded men, his silhouette dark against the lantern light, solid and reassuring. When Clara woke, gray dawn light was seeping through the cracks in the warehouse walls. She sat up with a start, horrified that she had slept so long, but when she looked around she saw that everything was in order. The men were all still breathing, the lanterns had been refilled, and James was spooning water into the mouth of the young homesteader with the chest wound. He looked up when he heard her moving and offered a small smile. "Morning. Everything has been quiet. 2 of the men's fevers broke about an hour ago." Clara stood and moved closer, checking the patients he indicated. He was right. Their foreheads were cool, their breathing steady. "That is wonderful news. Figured you could use some." She turned to him and noticed the shadows under his eyes. "You did not sleep at all." "I will sleep later. You hungry? I made some coffee and there is bread." The coffee was strong and hot, the bread fresh enough that it must have been in the supplies he brought. Clara ate standing up, moving between the beds, checking wounds and changing bandages where needed. James worked alongside her, and she was struck by how easy it was to work with him. He anticipated what she needed before she asked, moved smoothly out of her way when she needed space, stepped in to help without being told. It was like they had been doing this together for months instead of hours. Around mid-morning, the warehouse door opened and 2 more wounded men were brought in, both homesteaders who had been caught in an ambush the night before. One had a bullet in his thigh, the other had taken a blow to the head and was barely conscious. Clara directed James to help her get them settled, and then she set to work extracting the bullet while James held the man still. Her hands did not shake this time, and the bullet came out cleanly. She cleaned and bandaged the wound, then turned her attention to the man with the head injury. "Concussion," she said after examining him carefully. "Possibly a skull fracture. There is nothing we can do except keep him still and comfortable and hope the swelling goes down." "Will he live?" James asked. "I do not know. Head wounds are unpredictable." They did what they could, and then Rebecca arrived with fresh linens donated by the church. She took one look at James and said, "Mr. Cordell, you need to rest. You look like you are about to fall over." "I am fine." "You are not," Clara said firmly. "Rebecca is right. Go to the boarding house down the street and get a room. Sleep for a few hours at least. We can manage here." James looked like he wanted to argue, but Clara crossed her arms and gave him the same look she used on stubborn patients. He sighed and nodded. "All right. But I will be back this afternoon." "We will be here." He left, and Rebecca immediately turned to Clara with raised eyebrows. "That man is smitten with you. Do not be ridiculous. He is just helping." "Men do not give up their wages and sleep on warehouse floors just to help, Clara." "He likes you." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "He is being kind, that is all." "If you say so," Rebecca said, but her tone suggested she did not believe it for a moment. Clara tried to push the conversation out of her mind as she returned to work, but Rebecca's words lingered. She found herself thinking about the way James had looked at her, the warmth in his voice when he said her name. She had not thought about men in a romantic sense in a long time. There had been a boy back in Kansas before her father died, but that had been years ago and had come to nothing. Since then, her life had been focused on survival and on learning everything she could from her father's medical books. Romance seemed like a luxury for other people, people whose lives were stable and secure. But there was something about James Cordell that made her wonder. Something about his steadiness, his kindness, the way he did not seem to want anything from her except to help. It was unfamiliar and a little frightening and, she had to admit, not entirely unwelcome. James returned in the early afternoon, looking more rested though still tired. He had changed his shirt and washed, and Clara noticed he had a small scar on his jaw that she had not seen before. He got back to work immediately, and they fell into the rhythm they had established the night before. The hours passed in a blur of bandages and medicine, and quiet conversations with wounded men who needed reassurance more than treatment. That evening, after Rebecca had gone home and most of the patients were sleeping, James and Clara sat together near the door where the air was slightly less stifling. Clara had brought out 2 of the crates to use as seats, and they shared a can of peaches from the supplies, passing it back and forth. "Tell me about growing up," James said. "You mentioned your father. What was he like?" Clara swirled the peach syrup in the can, thinking. "He was brilliant and frustrating in equal measure. He was a doctor, a real one with a degree from a medical college back east, but he drank too much and made bad decisions, and we moved constantly. He taught me everything he knew, though. Every night he would read to me from his medical texts, explain procedures, quiz me on anatomy. I think he knew he was not going to live long, and he wanted to make sure I had something to survive on. He sounds like he loved you." He did. In his way, it was just complicated. "Most love is, I think." Clara looked at him. "What about you? You mentioned your brother. Any other family? Parents died of fever when I was 16. My brother raised me after that, best he could, while also trying to keep the family ranch going. When he got married, I figured it was time for me to make my own way. Did not want to be underfoot, so I started hiring on at different ranches, moving around. It has been a good life mostly, lonely sometimes, but good. Do you ever think about settling down, getting your own place?" James looked down at his hands. "Sometimes, but I never found a reason to stay anywhere long enough to put down roots. A place is just a place unless you have a reason to be there." Clara thought about that as they finished the peaches. She understood what he meant. Prescott was just another town to her, just another temporary stop, except for the work she was doing here in this warehouse. That gave her a reason to stay, at least for now. She wondered if James was looking for a reason too. Over the next several days, James became an indispensable part of the hospital. He was there every morning when Clara woke and every evening when she finally allowed herself to rest. He took over many of the heavier tasks, moving patients, carrying water, even helping to restrain men when Clara had to perform painful procedures. The wounded men grew to trust him, calling out for him when they needed help, joking with him when their pain allowed. Clara watched him interact with them and felt her respect for him deepen into something warmer and more complicated. She also noticed the way he looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention. Noticed the way his hand would linger on hers when they passed supplies back and forth. Noticed the gentle way he corrected her when she pushed herself too hard, bringing her food or insisting she sit down for a few minutes. It was not overbearing or controlling. It was caring, and Clara was not used to being cared for. One afternoon, a well-dressed man appeared at the warehouse door. He was older, probably in his 50s, with silver hair and expensive clothes. Clara recognized him as Thomas Garrett, one of the cattle barons whose men were fighting the homesteaders. She tensed immediately, moving to block his view of the wounded men. "Mr. Garrett, what can I do for you?" Garrett looked past her into the warehouse, his expression cold. "I heard you have been treating homesteaders in here, men who have been shooting at my ranch hands." "I have been treating wounded men, regardless of which side they are on. That is what a hospital does." "This is not a hospital, Miss Whitmore. This is a warehouse, and you are harboring my enemies." James appeared at Clara's shoulder, and she felt his presence like a shield. "These are injured men, not enemies. They are getting medical treatment, which is their right." Garrett's eyes narrowed as he looked at James. "I do not believe I know you. No reason you should. Name is James Cordell. I am helping Miss Whitmore." "Well, Mr. Cordell, perhaps you should know that providing aid to homesteaders is seen by many in this town as taking a side in this conflict." "The only side I am taking is the side of human decency," James said, his voice level but hard. "Now, if you have business here, state it. Otherwise, we have work to do." Garrett's face flushed with anger. "You both should be careful. This town has a long memory, and those who side with lawless squatters may find themselves unwelcome." "Then I will not lose any sleep over it," Clara said. "Good day, Mr. Garrett." She closed the door in his face and turned to James, her heart pounding. That was probably foolish. "He is a powerful man." "He is a bully," James said. "And bullies only have power if you let them scare you. Are you scared?" Clara thought about it and realized she was not. Angry, yes, worried about what Garrett might do, certainly, but not scared, not with James standing beside her. "No. I am not scared." "Good. Neither am I." That night, after the patients were settled, James built a small fire in the yard behind the warehouse, and they sat beside it, grateful for the warmth as the desert temperature dropped. Clara wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and watched the flames dance. "Do you ever think about leaving?" James asked. "Prescott, I mean, starting over somewhere else." "Sometimes, but then I think about these men, about the people who need help, and I cannot imagine just walking away." "That is what makes you a good person, Clara," she laughed softly. "I am not sure about that. I think it just makes me stubborn." Those two things are not mutually exclusive. They sat in comfortable silence, and then Clara said, "What about you? Are you thinking about leaving?" James poked at the fire with a stick, sending up sparks. "I was before I came here. But now I do not know. I feel like maybe I found something worth staying for." Clara's breath caught. "The work, you mean?" He turned to look at her, and in the firelight his eyes were warm and serious. "Not just the work, Clara." Her heart started beating faster. "James, you do not have to say anything," he interrupted gently. "I just wanted you to know, you are the most remarkable woman I have ever met. The way you care for those men, the way you stand up to people like Garrett, the way you keep going even when you are exhausted. I admire you. And I care about you, and if you feel even a fraction of that back, then I am staying in Prescott as long as you will let me." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. She had spent so much of her life alone, taking care of herself, not relying on anyone. The idea of letting someone in, of trusting someone with her heart, was terrifying. But as she looked at James, at his open, honest face, she realized she did trust him. Somewhere in the past few days, without her even noticing, he had become essential to her. "I do," she whispered. "Feel the same way. I was just afraid to admit it." James smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "Afraid of what? Of losing you, of this being temporary, of getting used to having you here and then waking up one day to find you gone." He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers. "I am not going anywhere, Clara, not unless you tell me to, I promise you that." She squeezed his hand, holding on tight. "Then stay, please stay, as long as you will have me." They sat by the fire for a long time, holding hands, not needing to say anything else. When they finally went back inside, Clara felt lighter than she had in years, as if some burden she had not even known she was carrying had been lifted. The next 2 weeks brought changes. The range war began to wind down as both sides realized they were bleeding money and men for gains that were not worth the cost. Fewer wounded men arrived at the warehouse, and several of the patients who had been there the longest recovered enough to go home. Clara and James worked together to care for those who remained, and their partnership deepened into something that felt inevitable and right. Rebecca noticed, of course. "You two are in love," she announced one morning, as matter-of-fact as if she were commenting on the weather. Clara blushed but did not deny it. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to anyone with eyes. The way he looks at you, Clara, like you hung the moon and stars, and you look at him the same way. I never thought I would feel this way about anyone." "That is usually when it happens," Rebecca said wisely. "When you stop looking for it, I am happy for you. You deserve happiness." "Thank you," Clara said, and she meant it. James had taken a job at a ranch just outside of town, working during the day and coming to the warehouse in the evenings to help Clara. He was saving money, he told her, for something important, though he would not say what. Clara did not press him. She was content to take each day as it came, to work alongside him, to sit with him by the fire at night and talk about everything and nothing. One evening in late August, after all the patients had fallen asleep, James asked Clara to walk with him. They strolled through the quiet streets of Prescott, past darkened shops and houses where families were settling in for the night. The air was still warm, but there was a hint of autumn in the breeze, a promise of cooler days to come. James led her to a small hill on the edge of town where they could see the lights of Prescott spread out below them and the vast darkness of the Arizona Territory beyond. He turned to her and took both her hands in his. "Clara, I know we have not known each other very long, just over a month, but I also feel like I have known you my whole life. You are everything I did not know I was looking for. You are strong and compassionate and brave, and I love you. I love you so much it scares me sometimes." Clara felt tears spill down her cheeks. "I love you too, James. I did not know I could feel this way." "I want to build a life with you," he said. "I have been saving money because I want to buy a piece of land, start a small ranch. Nothing big or fancy, just enough for us to make a living. And I want you to keep doing your nursing, keep helping people, because that is who you are. I want to support you in that. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to be your partner in everything." He paused and his voice grew softer. "Clara Whitmore, will you marry me?" For a moment, Clara could not speak. Happiness flooded through her, so intense it was almost painful. "Yes," she finally managed. "Yes, James, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and Clara felt like she was finally home. Not in a place, but in a person. In his arms, in his love, in the life they would build together. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Prescott. Rebecca and her husband stood as witnesses, along with several of the wounded men who had recovered thanks to Clara's care. It was a small gathering, but it was full of warmth and joy. Clara wore a simple blue dress, and James wore his best shirt and a new hat. The Reverend spoke about love and partnership, and the strength that comes from two people facing the world together, and Clara held James's hand, and knew every word was true. After the ceremony, they had a modest celebration at the boarding house where James had been staying. There was cake and coffee and laughter, and for a few hours the troubles of the world seemed very far away. As the sun set, James and Clara slipped away to the room he had prepared for them. It was nothing fancy, just a clean room with a comfortable bed and a window that looked out over the town, but to Clara it was perfect. James closed the door behind them and turned to her, his expression tender. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Cordell?" Clara smiled at the sound of her new name. "Happy." "Happier than I ever thought I could be." He crossed to her and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had started to fall again. "I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay this happy. Just love me," she whispered. "That is all I need." "That is the easiest promise I will ever make." They came together in a kiss that was sweet and full of promise. James was gentle with her, careful and attentive, and Clara felt cherished in a way she had never experienced before. They learned each other slowly, taking their time, building a foundation of intimacy that would sustain them through everything to come. When they finally lay together in the darkness, wrapped in each other's arms, Clara felt a peace settle over her that she knew would last the rest of her life. The warehouse hospital closed 2 weeks after the wedding. The last of the wounded men had recovered enough to go home, and the range war had officially ended with a tense treaty negotiated by the territorial governor. Clara was relieved to be done with the endless days of blood and suffering, but she also felt a strange sense of loss. The warehouse had been where she found her purpose and where she had found James. It would always be special to her. James had found a piece of land about 10 miles outside of Prescott, 160 acres with a small creek running through it and enough grass for a modest herd of cattle. It was not much, but it was theirs. They spent their first months of marriage building a house, a simple 3-room cabin that they constructed together with help from some of the men Clara had treated. It was hard work, but they did it side by side, and every nail they hammered, every board they set, felt like a promise kept. Clara set up a small clinic in one of the rooms, with shelves for her father's medical books and supplies, and a clean table for examinations. Word spread that there was a skilled nurse living on the Cordell ranch, and people started coming to her for help. Homesteaders with sick children, ranch hands with broken bones, women needing help with difficult pregnancies. Clara treated them all, and James supported her completely, often helping with the heavier patients or riding into town to fetch supplies she needed. Their life fell into a rhythm that was demanding but satisfying. James worked the ranch during the day, tending the small herd of cattle he had purchased and building up their fences and outbuildings. Clara saw patients when they came and helped James with the ranch work when she had time. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch they had built, watching the sun set over the Arizona hills, talking about their day and their dreams for the future. The first winter came, and with it, a cold that was harsh even for Arizona. They huddled together in their small cabin, keeping the fire burning, grateful for the warmth and for each other. During a particularly bad storm, a young homesteader arrived at their door in the middle of the night, his wife in labor and in trouble. Clara worked through the night to deliver the baby, a healthy boy who came into the world screaming with indignation. The father wept with gratitude, and James made them all coffee and breakfast as the sun rose over a world covered in snow. "You saved them both," James said as they watched the family leave later that morning, bundled against the cold. "That man and his wife and their baby. You are a miracle worker, Clara." "I am just a nurse who had a good teacher," she replied, but she was glowing with satisfaction. This was why she had learned her father's skills. For moments like this, when she could make a real difference, spring came and with it new life on the ranch. The cattle had calved successfully and they now had a growing herd. Clara planted a garden and James built a chicken coop and bought a dozen hens. They were becoming self-sufficient, carving out a life from the hard Arizona soil through determination and love. Clara had never been happier. One evening in early May, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Clara took James's hand and placed it on her stomach. "I have something to tell you." James looked at her, his eyes widening as understanding dawned. "Clara, are you?" "I am with child," she said, her voice full of wonder. "We are going to have a baby." James let out a whoop of joy and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around until she was laughing and dizzy. "A baby, we are going to have a baby. When? How are you feeling? Do you need to sit down? Should you be sitting down?" Clara laughed at his sudden nervousness. "I am fine, James. Pregnancy is not an illness. The baby should come in late autumn, probably November, and I feel wonderful." He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her thoroughly. "I love you so much, you and our baby. I cannot believe how lucky I am." "We are both lucky," Clara said, leaning into his embrace. "We found each other when we needed it most." The summer was slow and hot, and Clara's belly grew steadily. She continued to see patients, though James became increasingly protective, refusing to let her lift anything heavy or work too long in the heat. She found his concern endearing, even when it was slightly overbearing. He was going to be a wonderful father. They spent long evenings preparing for the baby, turning the smallest room in their cabin into a nursery. James built a cradle from smooth pine wood, sanding it until it was soft as silk. Clara sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart full of anticipation. They talked about names, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about the life they would give their child. In October, as Clara entered her final weeks of pregnancy, Rebecca came to stay with them. She had offered to help when the time came, and Clara was grateful for her friend's presence. James was capable and caring, but he was also nervous about the birth, and Clara knew he would feel better having another woman there who had experience. The baby came on a clear November night, arriving with a strength and determination that made Clara laugh even through the pain. It was a boy, healthy and strong, with dark hair like his father and lungs that worked perfectly well. James held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face, and Clara watched them together and felt her heart might burst with love. They named him Thomas, after Clara's father, and called him Tommy. He was an easy baby, sleeping well and nursing strongly, and Clara marveled at how quickly she and James adapted to parenthood. James was devoted to his son, getting up with him in the night so Clara could rest, talking to him constantly even though Tommy was far too young to understand. Clara watched her husband become a father and fell in love with him all over again. The years passed, measured in seasons and harvests and the growth of their son. Tommy learned to walk, holding onto his father's fingers as he toddled around the ranch. He learned to talk, his first word Papa, much to James's delight. The ranch prospered, and James was able to expand their herd and build a proper barn. Clara's clinic grew busier as more people settled in the area, and she became known throughout the territory as a skilled healer. When Tommy was 3, Clara discovered she was pregnant again. This time it was a daughter, born in the spring with Clara's light brown hair and James's gray eyes. They named her Sarah, and she was as different from her brother as night from day, quiet where he was boisterous, thoughtful where he was impulsive. Tommy adored his baby sister, bringing her wildflowers and singing to her in his high, piping voice. Life was good, but it was not without challenges. There were droughts that tested their cattle, winters that were brutal, sickness that swept through the territory. One terrible week when Tommy was 5, he came down with scarlet fever, and Clara spent 7 days barely leaving his bedside, using every bit of her medical knowledge to bring down his fever and keep him comfortable. James sat with her through it all, holding her when she wept with exhaustion and fear. And when Tommy finally turned the corner and began to recover, they held each other and thanked God for sparing their son. There were also joys, countless small moments that made up the fabric of their life. Tommy learning to ride his first horse, his face alight with excitement. Sarah taking her first steps while chasing after a chicken, laughing as the bird squawked and fled. Quiet evenings when the children were asleep, and Clara and James sat together on their porch, holding hands and watching the stars, still as in love as they had been that first day in the warehouse. When Tommy was 7 and Sarah was 4, Clara found herself pregnant once more. She was older now, nearly 35, and the pregnancy was harder than the others had been. James worried over her constantly, but Clara remained calm. She had delivered dozens of babies by now and knew her own body well. The baby was born in midwinter, another boy they named Andrew. He was small but healthy, and from the moment he opened his eyes, Clara knew he was special. There was a gentleness about him, a sweetness that reminded her of James. The children grew, and the ranch grew with them. Tommy learned the cattle business from his father, riding out with James from the time he was old enough to sit a horse properly. Sarah showed an interest in healing, following Clara around the clinic, asking endless questions about medicines and treatments. Andrew was the dreamer, always off exploring, coming home with pockets full of interesting rocks and stories about the animals he had seen. When Tommy turned 18, he told his parents he wanted to start his own ranch on a piece of land adjacent to theirs. James helped him file the claim and gave him a dozen head of cattle to start with. Clara watched her eldest son ride off to begin his own life and felt the bittersweet ache of seeing your child become an adult. But she was also proud. They had raised him well, she and James, raised him to be strong and independent and kind. Sarah was 15 when a young doctor came through Prescott on his way to California. He stopped at the Cordell Ranch to have his horse looked at, and he and Sarah talked for 3 hours about medicine and healing. After he left, Sarah came to her mother with shining eyes and said she wanted to go to medical school, wanted to become a real doctor. Clara hugged her daughter and told her she would do everything in her power to make that happen. 2 years later, Sarah left for a women's medical college in Philadelphia, and Clara wept as the stagecoach carried her daughter away, even as her heart swelled with pride. Andrew stayed on the ranch, working alongside his father, and Clara was glad to still have one of her children close by. He was 21 when he fell in love with a young woman from town, a homesteader's daughter named Elizabeth who was as sweet and gentle as he was. They married in the same church where Clara and James had spoken their vows so many years before, and Clara cried happy tears as she watched her youngest son start his own family. The years continued their march. Tommy married and had 3 children of his own. Sarah graduated from medical school and came home to Prescott, opening a proper medical practice in town while still helping her mother at the ranch clinic. Andrew and Elizabeth had twin girls who James doted on shamelessly. The ranch was now run by 3 generations of Cordells, and it thrived. Clara and James grew older together, their hair turning gray, their hands becoming gnarled with age and work, but their love never diminishing. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by decades of shared experiences, of facing hardships together and celebrating triumphs together. They still sat on their porch in the evenings, still held hands, still looked at each other with the same warmth they had felt in that warehouse so long ago. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a party. The ranch was full of people, full of noise and laughter and love. Tommy gave a speech about what wonderful parents and grandparents they were. Sarah presented them with a quilt she had sewn, each square representing a different moment from their life together. Andrew and Elizabeth organized the whole thing with military precision, making sure everything was perfect. As the sun set and the party wound down, James led Clara away from the crowd to their favorite spot on the porch. They sat together, watching the last light fade from the sky, and James pulled her close. 40 years, he said softly. Can you believe it? Sometimes it feels like yesterday, Clara replied. I can still see you climbing down from that wagon, bringing supplies to the warehouse. I had no idea that man would become my entire world. I knew, James said. Maybe not right away, but soon, very soon. You were so fierce, so determined. I looked at you and I thought, that is the woman I want to spend my life with. Clara turned to look at him, this man she had loved for 40 years, and she saw the young cowboy he had been overlaid with the older man he had become. Both versions and all the versions in between were precious to her. I love you, James Cordell. I have loved you since the day you stayed to help, and I will love you until the day I die. And I love you, Clara Cordell. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, you and our children and this life we built together. I would not change a single moment of it. They kissed, gentle and sweet, and in the distance they could hear their grandchildren laughing. Clara leaned her head on James's shoulder and felt complete. She thought about that young woman she had been, exhausted and frightened in a warehouse full of wounded men, certain she would have to face everything alone. She could never have imagined this future, this beautiful life full of love and family and purpose. But James had come, bringing supplies and hope, and he had stayed. He had stayed through everything, and together they had built something extraordinary. The years continued, softer now, slower. Clara's hands grew too unsteady for delicate medical work, and she retired from the clinic, passing her patients on to Sarah, though she still advised when difficult cases came up. James still rode out with the men sometimes, but mostly he let Tommy and Andrew handle the day-to-day running of the ranch. They had earned their rest, he and Clara earned the right to spend their days quietly together. They would sit for hours on their porch, sometimes talking, sometimes just existing in comfortable silence. They watched their grandchildren grow, watched them start their own families. They celebrated births and mourned deaths, as is the way of all long lives. Through it all, they had each other. One spring morning, when Clara was 72 and James was 75, they decided to ride out to the creek that ran through their property, the same creek that had been there when they first bought the land all those years ago. It was a beautiful day, warm but not hot, with wildflowers blooming across the hills. They rode slowly, their horses as old and comfortable as they were, and when they reached the creek they dismounted and sat on the bank watching the water flow past. "You remember when we first saw this place?" Clara asked. "We were so young, so full of plans and dreams." "We made those dreams come true," James said. "Every single one. We built our ranch, raised our children, grew old together. That is more than most people get, Clara. I know, I am grateful for every moment." James took her hand, his grip still strong despite his age. "I want you to know something. If I had my life to live over again, knowing everything that would happen, all the hard times and the good times, I would not change a thing. I would still ride up to that warehouse with a wagon full of supplies. I would still offer to help. I would still fall in love with you, because you have been my home, Clara. Not this land, not this house, but you. You have been my home for 47 years, and you will be my home until my last breath." Tears slid down Clara's cheeks. "And you have been mine, James. You saved me that day. Not just by bringing supplies, but by seeing me, by valuing what I was trying to do. You gave me a partner when I thought I would always be alone. You gave me a family. You gave me everything." They sat by the creek for a long time, holding hands, listening to the water and the wind and the birds singing in the trees. When they finally rode back to the ranch house, they were met by Sarah, who had come to check on them as she often did. "There you two are," she said, smiling. "I was starting to worry." "We are fine," Clara assured her. "Just taking a ride, remembering." Sarah helped them unsaddle the horses, and then they all went inside for coffee and the cookies Sarah had brought from town. As Clara sat at the table in the house she and James had built with their own hands, surrounded by evidence of the life they had created together, she felt a profound sense of peace. She had lived well. She had loved well. She had made a difference in the world, one patient at a time, one child at a time. That evening, after Sarah had gone home to her own family, Clara and James prepared for bed. James helped Clara with her buttons as he had done for years, and she helped him with his boots. They moved through their nightly routine with the ease of long practice, and when they finally lay down together, James pulled Clara close. "Good night, my love," he whispered. "Good night, James." They fell asleep in each other's arms, as they had done for nearly half a century, and they were content. The seasons turned, and life on the Cordell Ranch continued its steady rhythm. Clara and James celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by 3 generations of family. The party was even bigger than their 40th, with what seemed like half of Prescott in attendance. The mayor gave a speech about how the Cordells were pillars of the community, how Clara had saved countless lives with her nursing and Sarah with her doctoring, how the Cordell Ranch was a model of success built on hard work and integrity. Clara and James smiled and accepted the praise graciously, but later, when everyone had gone and they were alone again on their porch, James said, "They have got it wrong, you know. The ranch, the clinic, all of that, it is not what matters. What matters is this. You and me, the love we have shared. That is the real success." "You are right," Clara said. "Everything else is just details. The important thing is that we loved each other well." "We did," James agreed. "We really did." They lived several more good years, years filled with the small pleasures of old age. Watching the sunrise over the hills, playing with great-grandchildren, sitting by the fire on cold nights, Clara reading aloud while James listened. They grew frailer, their bodies betraying them in small ways, but their minds remained sharp and their love remained constant. James died peacefully in his sleep on a winter night when he was 83 years old. Clara woke in the morning to find him beside her, his face calm and at peace. She held his hand and wept, not because she regretted their life together, but because it was over. 56 years of marriage, 56 years of partnership, and now she was alone. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives James had touched. Clara sat in the front pew of the church, flanked by her children, and listened to story after story about her husband's kindness, his integrity, his loyalty. She knew every story already. She had lived them. After James was buried on a hill overlooking the ranch, Clara returned to the house they had built together. It felt empty without him, hollow in a way it never had before, but she was not truly alone. Her children visited every day, her grandchildren came often, bringing their own children to meet the matriarch of the Cordell family. Clara found comfort in them, in the continuation of the legacy she and James had created. She lived another 4 years after James died, and they were not unhappy years. She spent her days in the house full of memories, looking through old photographs, reading the letters James had written to her during the few times they had been apart. She told stories to her great-grandchildren about their great-grandfather, about the day he drove up in a wagon full of supplies and changed her life forever. She wanted them to know where they came from, to understand the foundation of love and partnership their family was built on. One spring morning, Clara did not wake up. Sarah found her in her bed, a peaceful smile on her face, James's photograph clutched in her hand. She was 87 years old, and she had lived a full, rich life. Clara was buried next to James on the hill overlooking the ranch. At her funeral, Sarah spoke about her mother's courage and compassion. Tommy talked about her strength and determination. Andrew remembered her gentleness and wisdom. But it was one of Clara's great-granddaughters, a young woman named Clara after her, who perhaps said it best. "Great-grandma Clara taught me that love is not just a feeling, it is a choice you make every day." She chose to love great-grandpa James every single day for 56 years. She chose to love her family, to serve her community, to make the world better in whatever way she could. That is the legacy she left us. Not the ranch, not the money, but the example of how to love well and live with purpose. I hope I can be half the woman she was. The Cordell Ranch continued, passed down through the generations, a testament to what Clara and James had built together. The small cabin they had constructed with their own hands was preserved as a family landmark, and new generations of Cordells would visit it and hear the stories about the young nurse who tended wounded soldiers during a range war, and the cowboy who brought supplies and stayed to help, and how that chance meeting blossomed into one of the great love stories of the Arizona Territory. In the town of Prescott, A plaque was placed at the site of the old warehouse that had served as a hospital during the Range War. It read, "In memory of Clara Whitmore Cordell, who healed the wounded without regard to their allegiance, and in doing so helped heal a divided community. Her compassion and courage will not be forgotten." But the true memorial to Clara and James was not made of brass or stone. It was made of the lives they touched, the family they raised, the love they shared. It lived on in every Cordell who learned the value of compassion from Clara's example, in every Cordell who learned the meaning of loyalty from James's life. It lived on in the ranch that still bore their name, in the medical practice that Sarah and her descendants continued, in the simple values of kindness and integrity that they had instilled in their children and their children's children. The warehouse where they met had long since been torn down, replaced by a modern building that served a different purpose. But sometimes, on quiet evenings, people walking past the spot would swear they could feel something in the air, something warm and hopeful. It was the echo of two people who found each other in the midst of chaos, who chose love over fear, who built a life together that mattered. And if somewhere in the vast mystery beyond this life, Clara and James Cordell were reunited, walking hand in hand through fields that never faded, beside a creek that never ran dry, under a sky that was always bright, well, those who had known them would not be surprised. Some loves are strong enough to transcend death, and theirs had always been one of those. The Wild West had been a hard place, a place of violence and struggle, of dreams shattered and fortunes lost. But it had also been a place where people like Clara and James could carve out something beautiful from the harsh landscape, could build something lasting from dust and determination. Their story was one of thousands that played out across the frontier, but it was also unique, special, a reminder that even in the hardest times, love can flourish if it is given the chance. In the end, that is what mattered most. Not the Range War that brought them together, not the hardships they faced, not even the ranch they built. What mattered was that in a warehouse full of wounded men, in the heat and chaos of July 1892, Clara Whitmore looked up and saw James Cordell climbing down from a wagon full of supplies, and something in her heart recognized him. And when he offered to stay and help, when he chose to remain by her side, he set in motion a love story that would span more than half a century and touch hundreds of lives. Their descendants still gather every year on the anniversary of that first meeting, coming together at the ranch to remember and celebrate. They tell the stories, passed down through generations, about the nurse and the cowboy, about supplies and sacrifice, about a love that started in a warehouse and grew to encompass a family, a ranch, a legacy. Children listen with wide eyes. Teenagers roll their eyes but secretly feel proud. Adults feel the weight of responsibility to live up to the example set so long ago. And in those moments, Clara and James live again. In the stories, in the memories, in the values they instilled, in the very land they worked and loved. They live on as all great loves do, not just in what they built but in how they lived. With compassion and courage, with loyalty and laughter, with patience and passion, with the understanding that true love is not just about the feelings you have, but about the choices you make, the sacrifices you offer, the life you build together one day at a time. The Wild West was tamed, became civilized, turned into something unrecognizable from those early days. But the story of Clara and James Cordell remained, a bright thread in the tapestry of Arizona history, a reminder that even in the roughest circumstances, humanity can flourish. That love can thrive, that two people meeting by chance can change the course of countless lives, and so the story ends where it began, in a warehouse in Prescott, Arizona, in the summer of 1892. A young woman tends wounded soldiers, exhausted but determined. A cowboy brings supplies and offers to help. They do not know yet what awaits them, what they will build together, how their love will grow and endure. They only know that in this moment they have found something precious, found each other, Found hope in a hopeless situation. Found love in a place of pain. The rest, as they say, is history. Their history. A history worth remembering, worth celebrating, worth passing down through the generations as an example of what is possible when two people commit to loving each other well. When they choose partnership over isolation, compassion over indifference, hope over despair. When they build something together that will outlast them both, Clara Whitmore and James Cordell. A nurse and a cowboy, two people who met during a range war and created something beautiful. Their story is ended now, but their love remains, eternal and inspiring, a testament to the power of human connection and the enduring strength of true love.